Siwatu-Salama Ra was born 27 years ago. Her name means born during war to bring in peace, sent by God.
Something that was really important during my naming ceremony was that people didn't come with like your regular baby shower gifts. You know, like they didn't come with like clothes or toys. They came with like lifetime commitments.
Siwatu's mom is Rhonda Anderson.
I'm a single mother of 4. I've been an environmental justice organizer for the past 18 years. I also worked with labor. I worked with labor for about 25 years. So my life has been constant activism in some way or another.
You might know Siwatu from her work following in her mom's footsteps as an environmental activist and organizer. She is a co-director of the East Michigan Environmental Action Council. In July of 2017, Siwatu was at her mom Rhonda's house with her 2-year-old daughter. Siwatu's niece, Ndeye, was there too. One of Ndeye's classmates came over for a sleepover. The 2 young girls had recently had an altercation at school, and the adults in the house didn't want Ndeye's classmate there. So the girl's mother, Chanel Harvey, drove over to the house to pick her daughter up, and a conflict ensued.
She had come to our house very upset, very angry. She started yelling at me, screaming at me, cursing at me. I'm asking her to leave, just go, and she wouldn't. And so the next thing that she did was ram her car into my car. That shocked fear in me.
Siwatu's 2-year-old was playing inside the car. Then, Harvey tried to use the vehicle to run Siwatu's mother over. Fearing for their lives, Siwatu held her weapon in plain sight, hoping to stop Harvey from running them over. Siwatu is a licensed concealed gun owner. Her gun was not loaded. Michigan is an open carry state. Michigan is a stand your ground state. But that didn't matter. Siwatu was sentenced to a mandatory 2 years in prison on a felony firearm charge. She was incarcerated immediately after sentencing. At the time of sentencing, she was in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy. Siwatu gave birth to a baby boy, Zakai, on May 21st, 2018, under the watch of prison guards. Zakai was taken from Siwatu within 48 hours. She spent 258 days in state prison. Last month, Siwatu was released on bond. She and her team are working on an appeal, hoping she won't be sent back to prison to serve the remainder of her sentence. We are humbled and thrilled to welcome Siwatu and her mom, Rhonda Anderson, to How to Survive the End of the World. They spoke to Adrienne recently from Rhonda's dining room table.
Really, nobody knew what was going on with me until after the conviction. And that's when I threw my hands up. I was like literally like crying out for help for my community to step in. And the reason why is because
up until then you were like, I think this is going to work out differently.
Yeah, it was totally like we had it under control. This was something very simple. This was, we felt like, I don't know. I felt like the truth was obvious. It was like, how could this go wrong? And it did. It went all the way wrong. It went totally wrong. And my mom, I just remember like, after the conviction, after hearing guilty, didn't know what to do. I couldn't even I wasn't even present in my body. 6 months pregnant, total panic attack. First thing that went through my mind was my children, and that's all I kept saying was my children, my children, my children. And talking to my mom like, Mom, my children, my children. And I remember, like, the goddamn bailiff officer that was in the courtroom telling me to get myself together. You know, really, like, I would never forget that. Like, the officer telling me to get myself together. You know, after the guilty, but rushed to the hospital to check on the baby. He was fine, and then made it home, and my mom called Michelle Martinez. You know,
Michelle called me.
Michelle called you? You know, like, I think I called Michelle, and I just cried. Yes. And what Michelle told me over that phone was, Michelle said,
she said she would
Siwatu.
She would mortgage her home.
She said, so this is not going to happen. We're not going to let it happen. How could they get this wrong? You know, she said, Siwatu, I love you so much. She said, I will put my house up for you. You know? And I was just like, when she said that, I was like, what? You know, like, no, you know, like, what? You would do that for me? Right. But no, you know, like, that was the moment where I recognized what kind of community I belonged to. And and that's when she rushed on over with her laptop, her 2 children.
In the storm.
In this snowstorm.
12 inches of snow on top of 6 inches of snow that was already on the ground.
Yeah. And started to send out these mass emails to our community to talk about what had happened and how wrong, like, you know, like how I was wronged within the criminal justice system within Wayne County, you know, within the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, you know, you know, so, and that's where it started.
Yeah. So you put out the call to your community, and, you know, Michelle is also a long-term environmental justice activist and a close family friend. And then there's so many people that, you know, responded to the call. Like, how can we help? What can we do? And so I want to hear a little bit about, you know, how that period of time felt, right? Where you're like reaching out to people. It seems like the most vulnerable thing in the world, you know, to suddenly be like, okay, I need a help from folks, you know? And my experience of y'all is that you're very much like, you know, the way you hold each other down as a family is like, it's us, you know, we have each other's backs, and we take care of each other, and suddenly having to be like, we have to ask everyone that we know and people we don't know. So I just want to hear a little bit about how that felt for y'all.
I think a lot of activists and organizers, we give so much of ourselves. You know,
yes,
we give so much of ourselves to others, which is, I mean, why we're here on this planet. That's really why we're here, is to be of service to other people. And that's it. And to be loving and kind. Yeah. And so our everyday life, when we're in meetings, when we're organizing, when we're doing our thing, where we are fighting for other people. You know, we're fighting for ourselves, but we're thinking of other people, right? The ones who can't fight for themselves, or, you know, things like that. But so to be on the receiving end, to kind of say like, all right, we need help. You know, my life is ending. You know, this is my children. You know, my children need your help. I'm being taken away. It was very scary, but yet I felt protected. And I felt like this huge relief. You know, I remember just sitting at this dining room table saying, like, you know, listen, like literally like watching the emails pop up on the computer, the responses of people, and being like, oh my God, you know, like look at people, you know, like look at these amazing, beautiful people who have literally like come to our aid, like, you know, like, and some of it felt, like, well, who are we, that you guys would come and do all of this for, like, who are we? You know, like, and people were like, what? You know, we love you. And I didn't know, you know, I've never seen so many people come together like that in my life.
That's right.
Like that in my life.
So one of the things early on was there was Michelle. Michelle came by, started the work. The following day was Saturday, and more people came by. And the Sunday, more people came by. And it was almost like every day after that, more and more people were coming by. So this house became too small. We moved over to Michelle Martinez's house, and more people would show up. And it was a lot of mamas with a lot of babies. And Michelle's back room turned into a daycare center.
Yes.
But they didn't stay in the back room. They were running all over the place. So it was just kind of amazing. And that's what I was saying before, how whatever this magnet that was set in front of us just pulled all of the people together. And that's not to take anything away from the men that showed up, like Blair Anderson, Kim Hunter, Bryce, Antonio, Shane, Malik Yakini, all of the ones that showed up, you know, with their gifts. It was like people showing up with a handful of gifts and their talent, saying, here, this is what we have to contribute, and we want to give you this. And that just kept going on. Even to this day, people are still showing up saying, what can I do? I want to help. What can I do? You know, and when this started coming from all over the world, that was mind-boggling. That was, it was just so awesome, so amazing. And at the same time that was happening, we were going through our hell. You know, we were in a place that I've only experienced with the passing of my oldest child, you know, so, and even that had kind of not a limit to it, because my son passed, and so your head tells you certain things, you know, like you won't see this, but to have a child put away in a place, you know, that you can't get to get them out of that place, that's a whole different kind of reality, you know. So hearing her phone calls, you know, and the cries, you know, I can't do this, mommy, and you know, it was just like a living hell, like a living nightmare. So you had this nightmare, and then you had all of this love and contributions on this side. So it was, I don't even know what you call that, you know, having to work between, have to function between these two existences, you know, of, so.
Yeah. Well, and you know, that's exactly where I was, you know, interested in going to next, because it's like the community comes out, and I think in spite of, I think everyone was like, we are powerful, you know, we are a movement, like we will be able to stop this. And we believe in miracles. We believe we do the impossible all the time. And so we're going to be able to stop this. And I think for everyone, it's been such a humbling journey to be like, okay, the only way out of this situation is to go through some portion of it. And so there's a place where y'all's paths split into two. And Siwatu, you know, you were behind bars, and Rhonda, you were on the outside. And so, Rhonda, what you were just speaking to is exactly what I wanted to ask both of y'all about is how did you survive? How did you survive those months while you were apart, while you were giving birth, while you were calling each other, while you were, how did you move through? And I know some of it, but I feel like there's so much wisdom in how y'all survived and whatever you're able to share.
Well, for me, it's actually kind of indescribable, one. At the same time, it's almost like you can't say how you survive because you're so busy trying to survive. You aren't writing it down saying, oh, well, I did this and I did that, But what I do remember is having this sense of, especially when she was pregnant, because she would call me so often and say things like she couldn't make it. I can't do it, mommy. I can't do it. And like, how does a mom respond to a child that's saying, I can't do it? It's unimaginable. So I felt like I was carrying her on my shoulders and she's pregnant. I'm in water up to my chin and I'm trying my best to hold her up, and every now and then I would go below, the water would come up over me, and so the important thing was keeping her above the water. Now how that happened, I can't explain it. I don't bit more know. I don't know. It was just one of the most difficult challenges I've ever experienced. So sometimes it was just simply indescribable. So I don't know how she did it. I don't know how she did it. We haven't even thought about this. How do you do it?
Yeah. How'd you do it, Siwatu?
How did I do it?
Yeah.
I don't know how the hell I did it. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I gave birth in prison. Oh. I don't know. I know that I was protected. I know that every prayers. Time I asked, I said, all right, God, show me that you're here. Just show me that I'm, not alone in this place, and show me. And when I tell you, Adrian, he would show me every single time I would ask. Yeah. And when it was almost like, being in this very cold, dark box, and you're using your hands to feel your way around. Yes. And you will hear this voice, and all it would say is, we got you. We got you. Just hold on. Just hold on. And so, I needed to hear that all the time. So I would ask all the time. All the time. All the time. That's right. And every time it would say the same thing. Just hold on. And that's what my mom would tell me. It's just hold on. Just hold on, Tootsie. Just hold on, Siwatu. And so I had to hold on. I had to hold on for Zala. Because there was many days where I didn't want to keep going. I didn't want to hold on. I said, no, I don't want to hold on. Why should I have to hold on to this madness? Yeah. Why should I? That's right. Give birth to him here? Why? Yeah. Why would I? Why? Right. So that meant a lot of phone calls. That meant
yes.
That meant a lot of money spent on those phone calls. That meant finding a little hope in the place, finding hope within the prison, finding love in the prison. And most of it showed through the other inmates, the other women, you know, the other women who had given birth there, you know, who had lived that horror, that nightmare. You know, some of it even showed through the officers. So when you arrive in the prison, everyone has to go through something called quarantine, where you're on, for the first 3 days, you're on 24-hour lockdown. You can't come out of your cell at all. I spent many of those, not many, but so those first 3 days were like really, really hard. And, you know, the entire time while you're in quarantine, you don't know what time it is. You don't know. I mean, you're able to look out the window and tell if it's daylight or night, but you don't know what time it was. And so I spent a lot of time just like talking to the moon, you know, at night, you know, just talking to the moon, you know, and just kind of like telling myself like, all right, Siwatu, you know, just believe that the message will come, believe that, you know, something is going to lead you through this. Just believe. You know, I wasn't able to call home during quarantine. And so that meant I had to look for any and everything that would come my way, whether it was, you know, so whether it was something that was written on the wall, on the side of the bunk, or, you know, on the desk, or there was a lot of graffiti like on the walls of like the women who had come through that cell before me. You can literally read the walls, and it was literally filled with cries of help, scribbled on the wall. It was cries of help. It was prayers. It was Bible verses. It was gang quotes and graffiti. You know, it was so many things that I remember being on those walls. And I remember actually saying like never to write your name on the wall, because it's almost like you'll come back or something like that. So I would never, like, you know, you would see people's names and where they're from, and you know, and things like that. But like after the first week, I was moved to a higher level, where you actually got switched from 24-hour lockdown to 23-hour lockdown. So you got 1 hour out. You can either spend that hour outside or trying to hang on in that line of 80 women for one machine to write your family at home. And so in that cell, I saw a scripture that was written on top of the bunk I was sleeping on. And every day, you know, when I would lay down, I would see that scripture, and I was so angry. First of all, I wasn't even interested into picking up a book. I wasn't interested into reading anything. I was just so angry at where I was. And I felt like if I was to pick something up and read it, then I was accepting where I was. So for a long time, I didn't do anything. I would make prayer, you know, and things like that, but I did not pick up their books. I did not pick up their Bibles. I just didn't want to do a damn thing. I would, you know, sit there and talk to Zakai, who, you know, in my stomach. But one day, after seeing the scripture, because like every time I would lay down and look up, there it is, you know, and something said, so I would just look it up, you know, just look it up. And I never even like picked and I've read the Bible a few times, like, you know, skimmed through it, but I didn't even know how to like even look up the scripture in this Bible. So here I am, like trying to look at this Bible and trying to find the scripture, and I found it. I think it was chapter 6, chapter 6, verse 10-12 or something like that. But it's Ephesians, I think. But it talked about, I think, so like, the most important part is that it said, the first word said, or the first sentence said, finally, I can make you strong. And it said,
Oh, wow.
and then it started to talk about how I'm holding you in this prison because there are evil forces at hand. And it's not with humans, but it's a evil force that is like playing out through humans. And and it said, I'm holding you hostage in this prison so that I can make you strong, so that you can deliver the good message of peace. And I said, I closed that Bible and I said, no way. You know, I slid it. I slid it on, you know, away from me. And I was
thank
like,
you, Jesus.
no.
Thank you, Lord.
Like, who do you think? Who do you think you are? You know?
Yeah.
And I was just blown away. I was blown away, and I was like, you know, and many times my mind would play so many, like, my ego would, you know, just kind of like fight against things like that would happen in the prison for me, you know. Just like small, like, you know, messages that would come to me that I knew, you know, my higher brain would know that that's a message to you. That's a message to you. That's your ancestors talking to you. That's the universe talking to you. That's God talking to you. You know, and then the ego part would say, no, because, you know, why? You know, or you know, but then the higher brain would say, well, why would is it a coincidence that you made it to that cell, that you slept on that bunk, that had just that scripture, like, you know, like you could have went to the,
needed to hear.
You know, like that, yeah, you know, like it was just many things that was like that my lower brain would try to like fight against.
Sometimes what you need to hear is not what you want to hear.
Right.
Too,
oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah. Like.
But I love this idea of the lower brain and the higher brain, and just the relationship between the two. And I wonder if you know, can speak about, were you in any kind of intentional practices around, you know, like this? So much of what you're talking about is like, oh, I could see that my ego was at work here. I could see that my lower brain was at work here. And for me, that kind of self-awareness has come through meditation. And I'm wondering if you were engaging in any kind of practices like that were helping you to, you know, just deepen into that self-awareness, deepen into what you could see of yourself.
Yeah. So, a whole new Siwatu was created in a prison cell, you know. And I think that I remember, like I said, I was not going to read anything. I was not going to seek anything. I said, God, this is what I said. This is how horrible I was. I said, God, all right, if you want to tell me something, then you're going to have to bring it to me, because I'm not going to seek. I was just so angry.
Yes.
And I'm being real with you. I'm being so real that I was so upset.
I believe it.
I was so angry because I remember telling my mom, I said, God must hate me.
Yeah, she said that.
I said, Mama, the universe is hating me right now because I could not understand how this had happened. I did not understand how I ended up in not a county jail, but a prison, you know, and
pregnant.
And pregnant. I said, God, really? Look, I was just so much in disbelief and so angry for so long. And so I remember like, there's something called like a day room where you got like chairs and tables, a TV for all of the women to come and like watch TV and stuff like that and chill out. So this I'm in a unit of, this is a pregnant and postpartum unit. It's about 60 women in total. It's the smallest unit in the entire prison. And so this day room is like always full, always full, always loud, always like exciting and all of that, or sad, because it's either a bunch of card games going on or a bunch of women surrounding the JPEG machine looking at pictures of their newborn babies. This was a very sad unit, very emotional unit. And I remember walking into the day room, and it was completely empty. And this was so rare because this is a full unit, and so you never saw this day room empty. And there was a table right in the middle of the day room, and there was one book sitting there. And something said, so I had to pick up this book, but then my higher brain said, no, the higher brain said, pick up this book. This book is for you. And my lower brain said, no, I'm not picking up that damn book. I'm going to walk past that book, And so my higher brain won, and I picked up the book, and I took it back to my cell, and I started to read this book. No, actually, I didn't even read it. I sat it on the table, and it sat there for about a couple days, because I would just look at it. Just look at it and be like, no, I'm not going. So it was this back and forth thing with myself. And finally, I just picked it up and read the book.
What was the name of the book?
It was called Deep and Simple by Bolazov. Bolazov, he actually died a few years ago, 2012. But this amazing soul. He did a lot of prison work. He had a project called the Prison Ashram Project, where for 20 years he worked with prisoners, whether they were on death row, like some of the like what they call the world's most heinous criminals and things like that, would help them to reach their inner peace, which is something that we all seek, right? We all seek this oneness with the universe, and he was able to steer men and women who were inside of a prison to that oneness. And so he helped. My community, Bo, my mom, literally saved my life in prison. I remember reading this book and just being like, just so blown away, just because it was like exactly what I needed. It had all, it was answering the questions that I had, the like, why me, what do you want? What am I supposed to do? I'm fighting against this. It was like Bo in this book meant so much to me because it helped me to kind of like relax inside of this prison cell and to be still and to meditate and to, kind of answer some of these questions that I had about what I was going through and to also prepare myself to give birth in prison.
Right.
And I think that if I didn't have Bo, it would have went totally, bad for me inside of there.
Yeah.
And I remember actually I think, and then I remember the pregnant counselor who was really not helpful at all. She called me to her office. Yeah. She called me to, well, Vince kind of said she was helpful in this way. She called me to her office to kind of check on me, I just, wanted to check on you. I heard that you're anticipating being let out of prison. I just don't want you to get your hopes up. I remember, this is what she was telling me. I don't want you to get your hopes up because this is probably not going to happen, And wow. I remember looking at her desk while she's telling me this madness, right? And seeing Deep and Simple on her desk. And I'm like, oh, I got that book, And she's like, really? Yeah, and She was like, here's all of his books that he's written, on her desk. Like, so she had like 6 or 7 books that he's written, and she was like, you can have them all, and so I left her office with all of those books. And so it really, really helped me, because inside of a prison, inside of a cell, you don't have your cell phone, you don't have your family, you don't have your laptop, you literally are stripped from every type of thing that brings you some type of comfort, and you're forced to sit with yourself, and to do any type, some type of work on yourself. And that that is, so if anybody walks out of a prison who is enlightened, it is the work of themselves, and it is despite of the prison,
Yes.
And so Bo helped me to take advantage of that hell.
Well, and it sounds like you started a bunch of projects. You did projects the whole time you were inside. At least it looked like you were, like I felt like every time I turned around, it was like, now there's a Poetry and Kites project, and you were bringing the voices of other prisoners out, and then you talking about, Muslim mothers and pregnancy and birthrights, and I'm really curious about how those projects bubbled up and how they sustained you as well. Because I'll say this: I remember the night before you were taken away, that you said to a whole room of us, you were like, "There's some purpose in this." And it was like, even through your anger and your terror, because, I remember sitting next to you and feeling the terror that was literally thrumming through your body. It was just like, I could feel that. And then I could also feel your resolve that this would not be wasted time, no matter what happened. And that was getting echoed back to you from the community. It's like, whatever this is, there's a purpose to it. And the sooner you realize that, the more you'll be able to serve it. And so I wanted to ask you some of the purpose you discovered in that place, and about those projects, about the poetry, about those other pieces.
Well, I mean, I think that if any organizing mother, any organizing activist found themselves inside of a prison, you're going to respond the way you know to respond, which is to organize, which is to respond to a unjust situation, and try your best to bring about change. Our brains is wired to respond in that way. We're able to identify a unjust situation and try to fix it, to bring some humanity back into it. And so that was something that was really big for me, is to kind of like bring humanity back into this pod of women in here, and it, I hope that it, made a difference, but it did. It started with the Muslim women who were being mistreated. For one, you're mistreated in there because you're a criminal, right? Or because they say you're a criminal, right? They, so like you don't even like deserve to be respected, or you don't even deserve to eat fresh food. You don't deserve to drink clean water. You don't deserve to have an adequate pillow or mattress to sleep on. You don't deserve to, breastfeed your baby. You don't deserve to give birth. And
it's all punishment.
It is like the way we view our punitive system must change. And I'm not saying it should, it must change. And this is going to affect the way that this world is heading. It also, again, like it started with the Muslim women who were actually there longer than me and have longer to go. So these are like women who have already been there at least 10 years and probably have another 10 years to go. And they would just tell me about some of the things that they would go through as Muslim women, because most of the prison are, the dominant religion in prison is Christianity, and so to be a Muslim in prison meant that those women went without many of the religious materials that is their right to have. So they went without Qur'ans, they went without hijabs, they went without the things that they needed to properly practice their spirituality. And listening to their stories of horror, of how the officers would treat them, the retaliation if they grieved it, the takings of their monies, like out of their prison monetary account. And so we started to organize around that, and it's not like you're gonna say, all right, I must organize around this. You're just saying, what can I do to make sure that I get to keep some of my dignity in this place,
That's right.
And what do I need for me to survive in this place? And that's what the women were saying. Like, this is what we need. This is my situation. I'm in this prison. I can't get out. So I choose to continue to live by doing this. And this is what I need.
Yeah. That's all I need.
Right. This is all I need. I need a Quran. I need to have fresh food. I need to be able to fast. I need to make my prayers. And that was being denied to them. And so that's when we reached out to CARE. Amy Ducre was was my first visit ever inside of the prison, and she came in to see me and was like, I got word that they're doing this and this and that, and I was like, yeah.
The Council on American Islamic Relations in Michigan filed 2 civil rights complaints today. The first complaint is about the treatment of pregnant 26-year-old Siwatu-Salama Ra. The council says she wasn't given access to a hijab or Quran in prison.
MDOC would not allow her own holy book to read.
They also say Ra is being denied meal accommodations for her religion. She cannot.
And we, got to telling her everything about what was going on with me, what was going on with some of the women. And, and Amy got to work, where I saw myself on TV a few weeks later. And I'm telling you, like while it was airing on TV, all of the women was like, Ra, oh my God.
Yeah.
You are on TV, girl. Like, girl, all of that. Like, go ahead, Ra, and all of that, like, oh, you inspired me, Ra, like, because everybody call you by your last name, because it cannot be personal inside of a prison. So you are your last name, right? You don't have a first name in there. So you're Ra. So I was Ra, and I remember, like, being so embarrassed about seeing myself on TV and being like, I didn't like that. I didn't like it one bit. But I know that, like,
you didn't like seeing yourself?
I did not. No, I did not. I was really, I thought it was going to be something totally different. I thought that I was really upset about that, but, that's fine. It's fine now. But during inside, it can become like
retaliatory or what?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was worried about that. I was worried about retaliation. But you don't you don't want to be the girl who's on on the news, in some instances.
Like standing out and getting attention
yeah,
in that way.
Yeah, you don't, you can it can become negative.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I get that.
I was really bothered by that. But while it was airing, I know that we got a phone call and they were like, they said something where they wheelchaired me all the way to the property room to pick up my headscarf that had been sitting there for like, I don't know how long, but I'm like, and then
wow.
the officer who was handing it to me and the inmate, it's so in the property room they have an officer and an inmate working together, and the officer was like, I don't know who you is, but they called me all the way from such and such just to come to this property room and open it up to give you this scarf. And the inmate said, this woman said, girl, I don't know who you is and who out there fighting for you, but you all are so inspiring, and so like wow. A lot of like just a lot of people would just stop me on the walkway like, man, like who are those people that come and see you in the visiting room? Like they're so inspiring, which they're talking about Eel and Michelle and, like they had like, and my mom and Amina and the babies, like, oh my God, like y'all are I just love y'all, like, just wanting to be friends and, like y'all are so inspiring, and so it transformed into the poetry, and kind of like, asking the women, it was kind of like a hard thing to ask them, like, hey, can I, like, could you write some poetry? Which a lot of poets, a lot of people who practice creative writing are really like protective over their work, right? And so like, I remember like asking the women to, like what could we, like to write to just write, And I remember sitting outside on the small yard, and it was a table full of us, and we all had our poems in front of us, and we literally like we're like reciting our poetry one by one, and either it made us cry or it made us giggle, listening to each other's poems, and like, and at the end of each poem, all of us would be like, ooh, that's so deep, stuff like that, like, like, and like, ooh, girl, that one line was so nice, I felt that, yes. And that was when I realized that how resilient these women were. And how I was so surprised, even in my own self, of just to be able to let go of the terror, the anger, and able to like sit in that moment and appreciate what was going on in that moment, which was love, which was compassion, which was honor, and and so we took those poems and I was like, we're gonna send them out and we're gonna see what happens. And, we sent these poems out. And, days later we get pictures back of a poetry event with different featured poets who read these poems at the event. Yes. And the faces on these women when they saw their poetry being represented in a space like that was absolutely phenomenal. To see themselves like, like, oh my, and that's what they were saying, like, oh my God, that's my poem, like, that's my poem, oh my God, that's who read my poem. Oh, she's beautiful. I'm glad she read my poem, or, things like that. Like, that's so beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And they were so excited to actually like be represented in the space and to have their work honored in that event, and then to have it be transformed into kites being flown at Belle Isle, and then a kite that was engineered in some kind of way by Complex Movements that was that is now on display at different
Exhibits.
on different they were like just so
Just
excited.
like abundant creativity came
Just
flowing out of this
absolutely,
hard place.
you know, just absolutely.
I think a lot of it was simply bringing humanity back to people who had been stripped of their humanity and their dignity, because that's how the system works. The system works by, one, imprisoning you in a place that takes you away from everything that you love. So the place that you're in is not a place of love. It's not a place of humanity. It's not a place of dignity, you know. But somehow the women, through writing poems and things of this nature, were able to get just a small grasp of their humanity again, you know. And even the guards were surprised, you know, because didn't one of the guards say something about civil rights? No, human rights.
Yeah.
You know, like
whoa,
human rights.
She did. She was like, I've been working here for over 20 years and I didn't know they respect people's rights, you know, and, you know, that was her telling me, like, you know, like, that's, like, I've been here this long and I've never seen that, you know, which was really powerful.
Yeah, there's this poet, Mahmoud Darwish, who's a Palestinian poet, and he has this poem called The Prison Cell that you may have heard, but it's so incredible. And it's about that, like how as a prisoner, him unleashing his imagination created a longing in the guard who was coming to tie him up or to lock him in chains, so much so that the guard was just like, where did you get your freedom and how can you give it to me? Like, can you help me get mine, basically? And I think there's something so incredible in what you're sharing about that, you know, that spark of liberation and that spark of dignity is something they try to stamp out. And then in any act of reclaiming it, it becomes a spark for a fire. You know, who knows where that fire can go and what it can change in its process. And so I'm a deep believer in what we can do to shape the future, and that it gets shaped collectively, you know, that it gets shaped by a lot of people holding on to or generating a new belief system. And I just want to say, you know, I think your entire situation and the fact that you are out now with your babies, holding your babies, with your mother, with your family, with your husband, with your sweet love, you know, with your sweet family. Like, there's so many people that love you. And the fact that you're out with them now is not an accident. I think it is a miraculous work that came from lots of different kind of faith. You know? And I felt like y'all had so much leadership in allowing a lot of different kinds of faith to come to the table and operate on your behalf.
Absolutely.
And I just want to really affirm that, you know, that I felt like so many different ways of, like you said, so many people showed up with offers and y'all said yes, you know. And there's just so much wisdom in that. And I'm so grateful that it has manifested in this period of freedom. And I'm excited for it to manifest to the next level where there's no listening devices on you. And I'm excited for it to manifest into the next level of freedom, which is, you know, what your children and your children's children and your children's children's children will do. So grateful for y'all. Thank you for making time so soon after you know, I know you're just out, and I was like, I don't want to add anything to her schedule right after she comes out, but I just wanted as many people as possible to hear your voice and hear from both of you the wisdom and brilliance with which you survived this apocalypse and with which you are turning and facing and shaping the future.
Yeah. Love wins.
Yeah.
That's what I said. I said, ooh, love wins.
To learn more about how you can support the movement for justice for Siwatu and her family, please go to freesiwatu.org. That's FREESIWATU.org. Thanks for listening to our show. We're on Twitter and Instagram at End of the World PC. We're also on Facebook at End of the World Show. You can make a sustaining donation to our show by visiting our page at patreon.com/endoftheworldshow. Another incredibly helpful thing you can do to help our show sustain itself is to write us a review on Apple Podcasts if you are an iPhone person. Thanks. How to Survive the End of the World is produced and edited by the incomparable Zach Rosen. Music for today's show comes from Blue Dot Sessions and Mother Cyborg.